On November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy was assassinated while riding in an open convertible. On the same day, C.S. Lewis died from kidney failure, and Aldous Huxley died from throat cancer. 20 years later, Peter Kreeft wrote a book called Between Heaven and Hell. In his book, he imagines Kennedy, Lewis, and Huxley in a waiting room reflecting on their lives before they reach the judgment throne. It's a powerful book that emphasizes what we read in Romans 14:10-12. For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. Each of us will give an account of himself to God. We have a similar example today. This month, John MacArthur, Ozzy Osbourne, and Hulk Hogan all passed away. Let's imagine each of them giving an account for what they did with their lives. What would it look like? John MacArthur spent his life as a pastor, theologian, and author. He was the senior pastor of Grace Community Church. He was also the president of the Master's Seminary, training pastors and Christian leaders for ministry. You may have also heard of his radio and media ministry, Grace to You. He spent his life serving the Lord and storing up treasures in heaven. Here's a testimony from John MacArthur sharing how he grew up in a Christian family and put his faith in Jesus at a young age.
My grandfather was a pastor and my dad was a pastor, so I grew up in the church and I grew up loving both those men. There never was a time I didn't believe. I think it was when I was about 9 or 10 years old that I had stolen something, and I felt this immense conviction, and I went to my dad, confessed to my dad what I had done. I knew I needed Christ to change my heart. I do remember that encounter with my sin and coming to my dad and saying, I need to be saved.
Hulk Hogan had a very different story. He did not grow up as a Christian, but instead pursued a life of fame and fortune in the wrestling and entertainment industries. But he struggled with alcohol, substance abuse, and scandals. However, only 2 years before he died, he was publicly baptized and gave his life to Jesus. Here he is talking about what his faith means to him.
I just surrendered. I just said I can't do it anymore, and I went back to the Bible, and I started reading again, and I'm either all the way in or all the way out with whatever I do. So if you're with me, there's no guesswork. If I'm with my Lord and Savior, I'm all the way in.
What message do you now convey at this stage of your life?
It's a spiritual war in this fallen world. To turn to the truth, seek Him and you shall find. To step outside their comfort zone and accept Christ, knowing that He would heal the land and heal this nation and heal the people. It just seems like such an easy choice for everyone. If you'll just surrender, accept Him as your Savior.
Lastly, Ozzy Osbourne was the most godless of the three, a heavy metal rock singer who spent his life glorifying evil. He was known during his music career as the Prince of Darkness. However, mere weeks before he died, Dylan Novak, known as the celebrity evangelist, had this opportunity to share the gospel with him.
The story of Ozzy Osbourne. Mm-hmm. Tell us how that went.
Ozzy is somebody that myself and most Christians would think is somebody completely off.
And too far gone, maybe.
To the gospel, yes. And, he's literally the Prince of Darkness. That's what he's called. Well, he had done an interview, and it had been like 5 years prior, and they asked him, where do you stand spiritually? And he said, I consider myself a Christian, which I was like, wouldn't have expected that. And so the interviewer said, do you read the Bible? And he said, I wish I could. My brain is pretty fried. I'm sure that's a big shocker. He said, and it's just written in a language I can't understand. I really would love to read it and study it more. And so I got him a New Believer's Study Bible and had his name put on the cover. So I referenced that interview, and he said, yes, I can understand it, and it's written in Old English. I said, well, look at this. So we were probably the distance of you and me across the table. He had a big table. So I lean across, and I hand him his Bible, and it's got my name on it. And he's showing his manager, and his manager, I couldn't tell how his manager took it. It was just kind of indifferent. And he opens it up, and he's like, well, I can, the font is big enough. And he immediately turned in the back towards the Gospels. And he's like, oh, this actually makes sense. thank you. And I was, you're so welcome. I really love you. And, well, thank you so much. Signs and keeps going. And I met his whole family, Jack,
you did.
Sharon, and Kelly. They were all there. Jack was great.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very nice. And what he didn't know is I was going to see him in 2 weeks. I didn't have to approach Jack. Jack approached me. And I was wearing the same jacket now that I was when I met Ozzy and that day. And it says, "Love God, love people" on the back. He walks up to me. He says, "Can I ask you a silly question?" And I said, "Sure." "Were you in Philly 2 weeks ago?" I said, "I was." "Come over to my table. I got a story for you." I said,
This is Jack?
"Yes, actually."
Of course.
We are. He said, "Dad's exhausted. We're taking him up to his room because it was at a casino. So his hotel suite was upstairs." He said, "We get him to the elevator and he goes, 'Where's my Bible? I'm not going upstairs without my Bible.'" And he said, all the horror convention people are like, "What?" And he said, "I told him, Dad," because Ozzy was in another room all to himself. And he said, "Dad, it's in your autograph room. It's already locked up. We'll get it tomorrow." "No, you're going to get it now." And he goes, "Well, Dad, they'll have to go back downstairs and unlock it." "I'll wait."
Wow.
Okay. So he said, we go down there, and he said, the convention people are like, "Is he losing his mind? Like, did he say Bible?" And he said, "It's a long story, but yes." So he said, we go into the autograph room.
Goodness.
There, he said, "There's your gift bag." And the Bible was sitting on top on the table. He said, so we grab the Bible, we take it up, and he goes, "I wanted to look at that on Saturday when I'm sitting up in my hotel room all alone." And so he said, we bring it to him, and he said, and Dad, I was like, "Are you happy?" "Yes, I am now." And he said, so we went upstairs. He said the next day at lunch, Ozzy, he was like, "Did you see my beautiful Bible?" And he said, we were like, "Yeah, we did that. That's beautiful." And then Kelly was like, "I got something similar." And he said, we just all started talking about what you'd given us.
Yeah.
And he said, "So just know, the Osbourne family sitting around the table, we're talking about where you shared the gospel with us." And he said, everybody that's come to my dad's house since the event, he said, they're like, "Hey, how did the convention go?" And he said, he'll go, "I got the most beautiful gift. Sharon, go get my Bible." And because he said it's sitting on his bedside table.
Wow.
And he said, Sharon will go get the Bible and he'll show it to whoever comes over to the house.
Yeah.
And he said, "I just want you to know," he said, "my dad doesn't keep many gifts. He's gotten a lot of gifts through the years." And he said, and it's not that he doesn't appreciate it, it's just we don't have room for it.
Right.
And he said, half the stuff is junk. He said, but he said, "I just want you to know that Bible's on his bedside table, and everybody that walks through the house has to see the Bible with his name on it that he can understand."
Wow.
So, and I'm just standing, as he's talking, there's tears in my eyes.
of course.
I was like, "Thank you, Jack." And
Wow.
yeah, so again, it's just goes to show some of the people that you see what they look like, the life they've lived, and it's like, they'd never be open. Some of those people realize more than anything, this is what I need.
Absolutely.
Because all the things of this world left me empty, but this is what will satisfy. This is what's eternal. This is what will save our soul.
So, did Ozzy give his life to Christ in his last few days on earth? I suppose we won't know until we get to heaven. But the more important question is, have you truly given your life to Christ? And what will you do with the rest of your life on earth? What will you have to give as an account to him when you stand before the judgment throne?